To understand why the used car bubble exploded, we have to rewind just a few years. The spark began during the pandemic, when automakers around the world were forced to halt production. Factories shut down, shipping routes collapsed, and the global microchip shortage brought new car manufacturing to a standstill. Suddenly, dealerships across America had almost no new cars to sell. With new supply frozen, demand shifted into the used car market. Overnight, second-hand vehicles became the hottest commodity. Cars that would normally sit on lots for weeks were gone within hours. Dealers were marking up prices by thousands, and buyers were willing to pay because they felt they had no choice. The average family that needed a car had to compete in a frenzy, often paying more for a 3-year-old vehicle than for the exact same model brand new, if they could even find one. But the real accelerant was easy money. Banks and lenders jumped in, offering auto loans at record-low interest rates. Financing became incredibly accessible, and instead of cooling the market, it poured gasoline on the fire. People were not just buying cars. They were bidding against each other with borrowed money. This created the illusion that prices would only keep rising. Dealers got greedy, private sellers raised their expectations, and families stretched their budgets just to lock in a vehicle. At the peak, used car values rose more than 40% in just 2 years, a pace that was completely unsustainable. Behind the scenes, experts were already warning that the bubble would pop. Cars are not like houses or stocks. They lose value the second you drive them. The inflated prices were never real. They were a distortion caused by shortages and panic buying. But millions of people ignored the red flags, convinced that their car would somehow hold its value. And now, as supply chains have recovered and new vehicles are back on the market, the truth is being exposed. Prices are plunging, leaving families with massive debts tied to rapidly depreciating assets. The stage was set for disaster, and the collapse we're seeing now was inevitable. The crash of the used car market didn't happen all at once. It began quietly, like a slow leak in a balloon. At first, prices simply stopped climbing. Dealers who once sold cars in a matter of hours noticed inventory starting to linger on their lots. What had been a buying frenzy suddenly turned into hesitation. Shoppers realized that new car supply was coming back, and the urgency to overpay for a used vehicle began to fade. Then the real collapse started. As more new vehicles finally rolled off production lines, the artificial scarcity vanished. Dealers who were holding overpriced used cars were now stuck. Vehicles that had sold for $30,000 just a year ago were suddenly worth only $22,000, sometimes less. For families who financed during the peak, this created a nightmare. They now owed far more on their loans than their car was actually worth. This situation is called being underwater on a loan, and it's devastating. Millions of Americans are trapped, paying hundreds of dollars each month for a depreciating asset that could never be sold for what they owe. For many, the math simply doesn't work. If a family financed a $28,000 used SUV that is now worth only $17,000, there's no way out except to default. Repossession rates have already surged across the country. Tow trucks are showing up in driveways at night, reclaiming vehicles from borrowers who can no longer keep up with payments. Some lenders report delinquency rates not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. Dealers, too, are bleeding. Many loaded up on used inventory at record-high prices, believing the boom would last. Now their lots are filled with cars they can only sell at a loss. CarMax, one of the nation's largest used car retailers, has already reported billion-dollar write-downs, and smaller dealers are shutting their doors entirely. What's happening is more than just a dip in the market. It's a full-on correction. The inflated values were never sustainable, and the crash is forcing every player, buyers, lenders, and dealers, to face that reality. The bubble has burst, and the fallout is spreading fast. The collapse of the car market isn't just about vehicles sitting unsold on lots. It's sending shockwaves through the entire US economy. Why? Because cars are deeply tied to credit, jobs, and even Wall Street. When this sector cracks, the damage spreads everywhere. Start with the banks. Nearly $1.5 trillion in auto loans are currently on their books. These loans were considered safe for years because people needed their cars to get to work, so defaults were relatively rare. But now, as borrowers fall behind and repossessions climb, lenders are facing mounting losses. The same banks that bundled and sold these loans as securities to investors are watching the value of those assets evaporate. It's eerily similar to the early days of the 2008 mortgage crisis. Then there are the automakers. Ford, GM, Stellantis, and even foreign brands rely heavily on financing arms to move inventory. When consumers can't qualify for loans or refuse to take on more debt, sales grind to a halt. Already, factories have announced production slowdowns, and some shifts are being cut. Each shutdown ripples outward, threatening tens of thousands of supplier jobs in steel, plastics, electronics, and transport. Dealership networks are also crumbling. Car sales have long been a pillar of local economies. Small-town dealers employ sales staff, mechanics, finance managers, and more. As margins shrink and losses pile up, closures are accelerating. Every shuttered dealership means dozens of lost jobs, not to mention the blow to local tax revenue. And the consumer fallout is massive. When families are underwater on loans, their budgets are crushed. That means less spending at restaurants, less shopping, fewer vacations. The average American household already spends about 20% of its income on transportation. With debt spiraling, other parts of the economy start to suffer. Wall Street hasn't ignored this either. Shares of major automakers and finance companies have taken heavy hits as investors brace for defaults and shrinking profits. Billions in market value have already been wiped out. Some analysts warn that if repossessions keep climbing, the auto loan market could become the next financial domino to fall. What we're seeing is not an isolated industry slump. It's a systemic risk that threatens banks, jobs, and consumer spending all at once, the backbone of the American economy. So what happens next? Is this just a temporary downturn, or the start of a full-blown collapse? Analysts are sharply divided. Some believe the auto industry can weather the storm if interest rates fall in 2025. Lower rates could bring buyers back into the market, making monthly payments affordable again. Automakers are lobbying hard for this outcome, arguing that cheaper financing is the only way to revive sales. But others warn that the damage is already too deep. Millions of households are locked into loans with balances far higher than the current value of their vehicles. Even if rates drop, they're trapped, either stuck paying inflated installments or forced to sell at a loss. That's a situation eerily similar to homeowners during the housing crash of 2008, when being underwater became a nationwide epidemic. Meanwhile, repossessions are expected to keep rising. Some estimates suggest that over 2 million cars could be repossessed in the next 18 months, flooding used car markets and driving prices down further. For buyers who once saw cars as an appreciating asset, the illusion is gone. Vehicles are rapidly returning to what they've always been, a depreciating liability. Automakers are scrambling to adapt. Electric vehicles, once hailed as the future, now sit unsold in record numbers. Gasoline-powered trucks and SUVs, previously the industry's profit engine, are piling up on dealer lots as fuel costs rise and consumer confidence shrinks. With shrinking demand across the board, companies may be forced into massive layoffs. Industry insiders quietly warn that tens of thousands of jobs could vanish if sales don't recover soon. And then there's the bigger risk: contagion. If auto loans keep going bad, banks may pull back on lending across the board. That would choke off credit not just for cars, but for homes, small businesses, and personal loans. A credit crunch on top of rising defaults could tip the entire economy into recession. For now, the car market's meltdown is a warning sign. It shows how fragile the U.S. financial system has become. One sector cracks, and the tremors spread everywhere. Whether this ends as a painful correction or the next great financial crisis depends on just how many Americans can keep making their car payments. The used car market, once the hottest ticket in town, has just hit a wall. For the past few years, Americans have been paying record-breaking prices for second-hand vehicles. Families desperate for transportation were bidding thousands above sticker price. Dealers were charging hidden markups, and some cars were even reselling for more than their brand-new versions. It looked like the used car market would never slow down. But now everything has changed. Prices are crashing, inventories are piling up, and millions of drivers are waking up to a nightmare. They're trapped in loans that are worth more than the car itself. This is the bursting of the used car bubble, and it's already devastating households across America. Think about this. In 2021 and 2022, the average used car price jumped to over $28,000, a historic high. Buyers rushed in, fearing they'd miss out, and banks were all too eager to hand out loans at inflated values. For many, it felt like the only way to secure a car was to take on massive debt that seemed manageable when prices were climbing. Fast forward to today, and that investment has flipped upside down. According to recent industry reports, used car prices have dropped by double digits in less than a year. Vehicles that sold for $25,000 are now sitting on dealer lots for $18,000 or less. The result? Millions of Americans now owe more money on their car loans than their vehicle is actually worth. This situation is called being underwater, and it's not just a personal financial problem, it's an economic time bomb. When too many people are trapped in negative equity, defaults skyrocket, repossessions soar, and the entire financial system begins to feel the pressure. And make no mistake, this is only the beginning. In this video, we're going to break down how the used car bubble formed, why it burst so suddenly, and what it means for car owners, banks, and the economy moving forward.